board meeting, October 21st. If you have a cell phone, please make sure it's silenced, and if you do need to take a call during the meeting, please just step out in the hall. We will, go through the agenda, and if there's any statements, just keep it to, about 5 minutes. State your name and address for the record. And roll call.
Bartelt,
Here.
Davis,
Here.
Girth,
Here.
Royal,
Here.
Hudak, Metz,
Here.
Miller, Millet,
Here.
Peschel.
Here.
All right, we have a few new faces today. We have a new board member, Lauren, if you'd like to introduce yourself and give a few words.
Yeah, I'm Lauren Bartelt. I'm really excited to be here. I'm fairly new to the Oshkosh area in general. I've been here just over a year, and I'm excited to get involved here. I really appreciate the impacts that parks have on community and access and building relationships and neighbors and all of that good stuff. And I'm also interested because I'm a runner and like to enjoy the green spaces in town. So that's a little about me.
Welcome aboard. And we have our adjunct member from Leadership Oshkosh, Kendra, if you want to say a few words.
Hi, I'm Kendra. I work at Evergreen Retirement Community, so we're just really excited to have the experience to be on a board that's not our own. So, see how other things are done.
Oh, welcome. All right, Ray?
I will take over this part of the meeting for the election of officers. Typically, we take care of this in August, but with the park plan going on and then we missed the September meeting, we're taking care of it this month. So I will open the floor for nominations for chair for the following year.
I'll nominate Amy. I think she's done a fabulous job.
Second.
Second.
Third, fourth.
Bob, were you the one that seconded?
Yes.
Okay.
Any other nominations for chair? Last time for nominations. If not, you can take the roll.
All right, Bartelt.
Yes. Aye.
You just have to be verbal, that's all.
Okay. Will do.
David, no, well, does she can't vote for herself, right?
She votes.
Davis,
Aye.
Girth,
Aye.
Royal,
Aye.
Metz,
Aye.
Millet,
Aye.
Peschel.
Aye.
Motion passed 7-0 for Amy as chair.
I nominate Tony for vice chair.
Second.
I'm sorry, whose voice was that?
That'd be me.
Thank you. Any other nominations? Bartelt,
Aye.
Davis,
Aye.
Girth,
Aye.
Royal,
Aye.
Metz,
Aye.
Millet,
Aye.
Peschel.
Aye.
Motion passed 7-0, Tony as co-chair.
I don't have a speech prepared, Stacey.
Oh,
We will-
we saw you tearing up a little bit.
Yeah.
All right, move on to the minutes from August 12th. Any comments, questions, concerns? All right,
Move to approve.
second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed?
You should still know.
Any citizen statements for anything not on the agenda? All right. Any old business? Moving on to new business. All right. The preferred concept design for Lakeshore.
I'll kick it off for the board, Amy, if you don't mind.
Please.
Smith Group has been working diligently for the last month and a half since the meeting in August on looking at things that the board and the public wanted to see in the plan, working with other city staff and departments, talking about issues that might have come up, ideas that were discussed, and working through those. Also included, they've started working on some priority phasing of projects. Those are for discussion this evening. It's based on things that we were hearing through the community, but also based on available dollars and so forth. So Nathan will go through that as well. And then as far as some of the cost estimates, those were included in your packet as well. If you have specific questions, we didn't provide a per unit breakdown at this point because it's very conceptual, but at least it gives you an idea phase-wise, the dollar amount we're looking at. But if you have specific questions, Nathan does have some budget information that he can help you with. So what our goal is tonight is to hopefully come up with that preferred plan out of this document. From here, what we need to do is make a recommendation to both to the Plan Commission and Common Council for their approval. So those would be the next steps.
Okay, thanks, Ray. Thanks for having us back. It's good to see everybody. I'm going to spend a few minutes, since we haven't talked since mid-August, spend a couple minutes kind of going through some of the slides we saw last time. In particular, kind of a reminder of the public input summary, a reminder of some of the precedent examples that we shared with you last time, just because I think it's helpful to kind of see something real before we jump into just looking at plans. And then we wanted to kind of refresh by looking at the three options we saw last time, and then we'll kind of walk through the components of what we're calling the preferred concept plan, and then kind of walk through the phasing of that plan and the associated costs. So just Ray mentioned this, we're at a point where we're looking to recommend this to Plan Commission and Council. So we're the magenta dot there. We're slid a month out because we didn't meet last month. So we're kind of honing in on the final product here. And again, just we're not going to do a deep dive into this stuff because I know we talked about it, but I thought it would be good just to kind of remind everybody of the big takeaways from the public visioning workshop. You know, this was one of the example boards from the workshop that we scanned and dropped on there with some quotes from the public. You know, this was taking all of that data and you know, kind of processing it and understanding what we were hearing. And down in the bottom right there, that's kind of our really coarse-grained summary of the takeaways, right? There's a strong preference for restoration, trails and parkways, basic infrastructure, recreation amenities, picnicking, small event space. So really, you know, kind of a nature park with space for people, I think is one way we could describe it. And depending on what we were looking at, preferred activities, time of year, et cetera, the results kind of kept returning that same basic message. And this, even the comment cards where people weren't answering our specific questions, we were still hearing the same thing, right? Public art, trails, nature are the things that ranked highest. And so this was what we saw last time. This was our kind of 5 bullets in terms of takeaways from that process. You know, passive recreation, native habitats and ecosystems, art, community, and respecting history and culture. So those are kind of the big buzzword summaries. Last time we also kind of, you know, talked about the big drivers in terms of how we're understanding the site and what we're looking at and what we're trying to do with the design. The 3 options we talked about last time in August really focused a lot on water and leveraged water as kind of a, you know, an organizing backbone for the site, if you will. So the existing ponds are in that diagram on the left, and then the aerial here, this is the 1937 aerial. You can see those ponds were really more of kind of a little broken stream, you know, and this was really kind of the remnants of when the river sort of meandered and moved around more than it does today. And we were interested in figuring out how we could work with that history. We talked a lot about edges. I think we have over 4,000 lineal feet of shoreline. importantly, we also have these two connections to Rainbow Memorial and Mary Jewel Parks. So really what we do at Lakeshore, you know, along this kind of east edge can really work to connect the parks together. With Rainbow in particular, you know, that really is all about that waterfront connectivity, kind of a big important move at a city scale, right? And then also kind of the yellow dash line is, you know, where the park backs up to mixed use development, existing residential neighborhoods. And really there, you know, one of the big takeaways was that the west half of the park, you know, it's kind of, the edges are a little bit of a back door, right? There's the hotel, there's the freeway, there's kind of the businesses at the west end of Oshkosh. So, you know, really that west end started to have kind of this introverted character, you know, it's kind of an island park. And then the east end really is the point where, you know, you go out to the end of Pinoqua, you kind of immediately engage the lake, there's the connection to Rainbow Memorial. So two very different kind of halves grew out of this way of looking at the park. And then this is where I just wanted to kind of, you know, run through really quickly those precedents that we looked at last time. So we had this idea of the threads, places, and moments, right? Just kind of our way of organizing our language. So we've been looking at water and restored habitats, and I think the thing I wanted to just quickly stress here is, you know, we've been talking a lot about, do we restructure the water system? How do we do that? You'll see where we've kind of landed with that after working through this with parks and engineering over the last 2 months. But I think the big takeaway is, you know, even if the pond network sort of remains in situ, we're still looking at restoring the margins of all of these water bodies as part of this phased implementation process. So, you know, right now the ponds are kind of, you know, they're bodies of water with cattails at the margins and then quickly transitions to lawn, right? Because it's a golf course, or it was a golf course. But I just want everybody to kind of keep images like this in their mind when they think about what that future condition of the pond would be, because the idea here is to aspire to that nature park, right? Of course, you know, a park of this scale, trails and pathways and boardwalks and things of that nature are critical in terms of connection, and that's also kind of one of the basic program elements of the park. Open buildings, so everything from restrooms that are naturally ventilated to open air picnic structures, you know, these are things that we've been looking at locating throughout the park. We've also been talking a lot about a four-season building, and when we were talking about that last time, all three of the options we showed you put that building at the end of Pinoqua. For a number of reasons. There's infrastructure there, there's a street there, there's a lot of good rationale behind why it found its home there. But looking at that, and we'll have a little more info for you on that. And then this idea of earthworks, in particular at the west half of the site. Again, you know, the freeway noise being pretty dominant unless you get down to a low spot or you're protected by topography. So the idea of building up the earth around that core area to make that an inviting space. And then just smaller places throughout that, you know, places to launch a boat, places to park your bike, places with signage, overlooks, that sort of thing. So these are the smaller things that, you know, at kind of the grain of a master plan on a park this size, these little things, you know, you can't really even locate them in a plan, right? They just sort of disappear. But these are things that we kind of always have in mind as we're thinking about trail networks and thinking about designing space. And then this idea of art, last time we talked about this idea as a way to kind of, you know, put an exclamation point on top of one of those earthworks at the West Park to create a sense of identity. It could be everything from literally a sign that says Oshkosh, right, to something more abstract. We talked also about something that, you know, akin to a light installation that would work well at night, that would get people there in the winter, give them a reason to kind of hike around the park. And so these were the three options we talked about last time, and I kind of bulleted out a handful of comments that we heard. These are all sort of positives. These were all things that people mentioned that they liked from these 3 plans. So really we heard the water connectivity of option 2 people liked, the hills and overlooks. The hills both for kind of creating a vantage point, but also that idea of winter use as a sledding hill. The idea of a nature playground. This idea of a large park or a large lawn at the west half of the park resonated, I think, with pretty much everybody. We heard simpler trails with fewer boardwalks, so kind of reducing the amount of trail. You know, this option 3 in particular had some pretty complex moves where pathways were crossing and engaging water, so we've tried to dial that back. Everybody seemed to like that idea of a stepped revetment at the center of the site, so that's where we're taking the shoreline protection and kind of creating these giant stepped seats. So it's a place to kind of, you know, occupy at the water's edge. The idea of a dedicated and substantial interpretive area. So if you'll recall, when we described option 2, we noted that this, because of the linear nature of the proposed water system in that option would lend itself well to an interpretive messaging kind of being scattered along the length of that water course. But I think we heard pretty clearly that that's okay if we go that route, but we still need a specific place that's in proximity to that known archaeological site, which is, you know, kind of the high ground just east of the Oshkosh Corp building, to really have, you know, a solid and dedicated place to present that message, whatever that message may be. That's a whole other process. True restroom building at the West Park, so there was not a strong preference for porta potties over there. Everybody liked the splash pad, and this idea of the larger pond, people liked that idea of that engaging with the lawn and engaging the pond. So that's where we were last time. I may have missed a few, but that kind of a you know, overall summary. So as I mentioned, we've been working through this, in particular kind of thinking through the nuance of phase 1, because phase 1 is something that's a little bit more tangible and more real. So we can talk about that in a little more detail, but we've cycled through a number of iterations with parks and with engineering to kind of land on the scheme that we're at right now. So this is the existing site with the Oshkosh Corp site rendered in, and also you'll note with the trail rendered along the waterfront. So that's that white band that snakes through. So this is where we're at with the preferred concept plan. So it's pretty similar, if I can jump back really quickly. It has a lot in common with both option 3 and option 1. We kind of went back and forth about the best way to approach the water system, and that really became a big driver for where things landed on the site. And where we're at right now with the water system is that we're maintaining the ponds more or less in place and maintaining their function. So think about it in terms of the pipes that engineering just put in last year are still in the ground, connecting the ponds in the same way. The elevation and the bounce on the ponds is the same as it is today in terms of how they work to manage stormwater and move stormwater through the site, which, James, kind of happens in a counterclockwise fashion, right? More or less. And what we're proposing is that, you know, these things kind of work the same way, but we come in and we regrade the margins of all these ponds, and in some places, you know, we add small extensions. So that's why you see some of these, you know, these shapes in the preferred concept not being a one-to-one with what's out there today. But, you know, we were kind of working with the assumption from a kind of costing exercise standpoint that we would basically touch 50% of the edges of these ponds to rework them, make them feel more connected. And then the dark green that you see sort of weaving between them is that idea that we talked about last time, which is the kind of wetland habitat vegetation type that we would use to kind of link them together visually, even though, we're not going to necessarily have an overland flow connection from one pond to the other. So they become part of one network, but, we kind of took an approach from, like a investment standpoint, from a maintenance standpoint, et cetera, to kind of work a little bit more closely with the footprint of what was out there. We have a couple enlargements that were in your packet, so we can go through those, but just really quickly, this is a little harder to read on this screen, but this is kind of the circulation network for the site. This green, which isn't showing up great, is the pedestrian pathway network. So at a minimum, kind of these outer loops at the west, and then this path that kind of snakes through the east would be, 8 feet wide and vehicle rated so that parks could access the entire park. The orange zones on the plan here are the parking areas. So there's a 40-car lot at the west lot. There's a small 20-car lot off of kind of the northeast corner near Mary Jewel. There's a lot for about 80 cars over in this zone, which this is the phase 1 zone that we'll take a closer look at. And then we parked an additional 20 cars sort of on street perpendicular off this north edge of the drive-through Rainbow Memorial. The blue line here is that's the alignment of the trail that's going in right now. It's under construction, and then these red circles are that idea of those kind of entry points. We've been thinking about the entry point at the west lot and at the east lot, the phase 1 lot, as being a little bit more substantial. Some of these entry points to the neighborhood and at the trail could be, that's something as small as park signage and a bench and a bike rack. But acknowledging that it's important to kind of orient people at those points, given the scale of the park. And then this is just kind of showing you the water system and the landscape framework. And I think the big thing to communicate here is that, these kind of darker green zones are the berms. So these are the earthworks at the West Park. I mentioned earlier that we've been thinking about this West Park as being a little bit more introverted, just given its context. So between this kind of ring of water and the ring of earthworks, that you get a feel for how well defined that kind of great lawn in the middle of the West Park becomes. But while still trying to, maintain some long sight lines to the water, from that lawn, and thinking about views from these small buildings. These are the open air picnic shelters. So one kind of across to the hilltop with the overlook and the artwork, one kind of the long view through the lawn looking towards the water. And then at the east half of the park, you get that same sort of definition with water kind of surrounding this phase 1 knuckle and a couple big open lawns that front the water's edge. And we can go through this in a little more detail too. So this was in your packet. This is the kind of 3-zone breakdown. We'll look at the West Park first. So again, the idea of these earthworks that help to kind of contain the site, block some of the noise from the freeway, block some of the less desirable views, like the Oshkosh Corp parking lot. You'll still see the building peeking through, in the background, but to kind of give you some foreground other than that slope up to the parking. 2 big lawns. One a little bit more densely planted with trees. The thinking here is this one kind of starts to dissolve into this forested edge. The water system, and then down here we've located the restroom building. It's kind of towards the periphery of the site, but the reality is that this is the point where we have infrastructure and can gravity drain a restroom. So if we were looking to put this somewhere else, we'd have to get a little bit creative in terms of something in between a porta potty and a restroom. Yeah. Yeah.
So about how far is that restroom and the parking lot from the actual open area picnic?
From the lawn?
Yeah, like if
well,
you carry all your stuff to the.
Right. Good question. So the parking lot is 60 feet wide. So I'd put it at 200 feet to this park shelter. But that's a very good question in terms of wheeling stuff in. And I think those are the big moves on the west half. We were thinking that this kind of northeast corner of the parking lot where you have connection in from the neighborhood, you're kind of at a point where the connection from the east park is stitching into this half of the park and next to the parking. This would be that kind of trailhead kiosk zone. So this is where you get a little orientation relative to the larger context. And think, instead of just a sign saying welcome to Lakeshore, this is where there's a kiosk with information about how do I rent the park shelter. There's a map, something that orients you to the Heritage Trail and that sort of thing. So a little bit more robust orientation point. Yeah. Yeah.
So when you mean the restroom in the west corner, that's like a completely functioning plumbed
Correct.
Restrooms. At those other areas, those other points where there's structures, are those going to be considered like open? Are there going to be open ventilation bathrooms there?
No.
So this is
We
the
weren't
only
no.
bathroom on this section of the park.
Yep.
Okay. My other question is the existing stormwater pond, is that going to stay where it is?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Are you doing any work to that, or just we'll leave that untouched?
I think at the very least, the north edge and the west edge, I think we would suggest that it gets the same landscape treatment as the rest of the park, so it feels integral. But, the city just built it. We wouldn't propose to rework it. So.
Just give it a little character.
Yeah, I think, so, overall, it's really hard at the scale of a master plan to start to put numbers to some of this stuff. So we kind of had to just go with allowances for some things like landscape restoration. But I guess one way to think about it is, right now, the entire park is lawn and trees. For the sake of minimizing maintenance for the city, we're proposing that only what we're calling lawns are lawn, and everything else would be, seeded to a native prairie mix, or kind of a combo savanna prairie mix. And so with that, there's a lot of effort in terms of regrading. We don't have to scrape the entire site, but it would be a little bit odd to just kind of till it and seed it and still have kind of the topography of tee boxes and greens with prairie growing. So we're kind of thinking, the big moves in terms of earthwork are the hills, and then the rest of the park, basically, there's an allowance to sort of scrape some of those golf-specific elements away, right, and recontour the site, and then restore the whole thing, which would be part of that phased implementation.
Ray, do we have the staff to maintain this once we blow the 2 million?
We really don't have the staff to maintain what we currently have, Bill, and you'll see that in our budget request that's coming to the council next week. We're in the same boat anybody is right now, struggling to find staff, keep staff. Adding like this, that's why we're proposing our budget to increase our staffing potentially if available, and I think we're going to have to. We're falling behind on just routine maintenance in our other parks, so if continually adding this and Riverwalk and other things to us is become a burden. So once we are fully developed here, it's going to take some maintenance. We're going to have restrooms to clean. We're going to have all the other things that come along with added amenities and features.
So we don't have the staff today to do what we're looking at. Is that simple?
Completely developed, I would say no.
Okay, all right.
So kind of the big overview for the east half of the park, and we'll kind of look a little bit more closely at phasing, but the four-season building with associated terraces, a public plaza with a splash play feature, a large flexible lawn, and a couple more big lawns up kind of closer to the water. So these are pretty substantial size-wise. So these could be used for kind of active rec, but not in an organized way. That's how we're imagining it, right? It's graded to be a crowned, relatively flat field so that it's multifunctional, basically. We would, in the first phase, we would rework a couple of the ponds at the very north end because of their relationship to the building and the terraces. Again, there's the parking lot with a drop-off and a couple of kind of pull-off spaces through that drop-off loop that are big enough to accommodate buses. So if this was used for a jumping-off point for a school event or a party where people were bussed in, that's accommodated. Pinocqua terminates in a cul-de-sac with on-street parking, so that those who want to get right to the water for fishing have a spot to do that. There's that idea of a fishing and small personal watercraft pier. So this wouldn't be something we would want power boats docking to, but this is the thing where we'd have an accessible kayak launch and things like that. And then the other kind of big item to note is this is that location of kind of the Hilltop Cultural Heritage Acknowledgement Site. Again, we're trying to give it a home, but we don't want to be prescriptive about what that is because we haven't engaged the stakeholders. So acknowledging what we feel is an appropriate location near to that hilltop site that is the kind of place of archaeological significance, and then that stepped revetment at the center of the site. And then just wanted to zoom in on this a little bit so you get a slightly better feel. The idea here is in terms of arrival, if you're coming in by car, you'll be coming through a drop-off loop or coming right into the parking lot. What we propose to do is pull that building and its terraces up a few feet so that it has good views over the ponds, over the park to the water. It also gives it kind of a little bit of significance relative to the rest of the park. And the other thing that does is this building is about 2,500 square feet. That is a pretty good size for accommodating somewhere between 120 to 175 people in kind of a flexible venue space with associated restrooms and things like that. So the thinking would be that this building has dedicated restrooms for the interior space and would also have exterior entrances for restrooms that would serve the park. So by putting this up on the terrace, not only do you kind of gain some views to the surroundings, make the building very visible, but also you allow the splash pad and the plaza to keep working even if there's an event here, because it's very easy to kind of rope off those two zones and have them doing different things at the same time. And this is just to give you kind of a visual. These are two projects that we've done. The one on the left was built in Oak Creek. I think that was just finished up year before last. The one on the right we're working on, it's down in Toledo. This is just the construction drawing, but it gives you a feel for one big open room that's anywhere from 2,000 to 2,500 square feet, and then this is all restrooms, a little back of house storage for tables and chairs and that kind of thing. So this would be the model that we would kind of be anticipating the city pursuing when they make phase one up.
Those garage doors so that they can open up.
Yeah. So this is a nice, simple, flexible terrace off the side of it too.
This might be more for Ray. How do you envision this being managed or run? I don't know exactly how that would work.
We would have seasonal part-time staff doing this. We'd have most likely our full-time staff doing a lot of the cleaning, but we'd have to have some seasonal part-time people, just like we have on weekends and evenings for other events. So we'd have to work that into our operations.
So, would we picture a concession stand at this facility, like we would at the zoo?
We haven't gotten to that point yet. I don't know if this would be the ideal location for concessions because it's more for, I think, the private rentals. It's a little bit too far away from Rainbow Memorial Park Ball Diamond to have concessions that, so in my mind, I wouldn't see that here, but I'm not closing out the discussion of having that. I think
Is this
it's,
something like that they could rent for weddings and everything?
Yeah,
Correct.
exactly.
Okay.
yep.
You want to get married?
No.
I meant to me.
Oh, no.
Can you go back, Nathan, just, because we've had some discussion about the bioswales versus adding more ponds and so forth. If you want to talk a little bit about that.
Oh, on this drawing?
Yes.
Yeah, so the thinking is that, you know, we're introducing quite a bit of new impervious area at this end of the site between the plazas, the terrace, the building, the parking, et cetera. So these two big zones of textured green between the cul-de-sac and the drop-off, and then within the drop-off itself, we're imagining those would be stormwater GI, so basically bioswales, detention areas to treat that stormwater before it gets passed down to the pond network.
So I guess in my mind, what we were envisioning is kind of what's by the convention center, Riverside Park type bioswales. And as Nathan said, that really helps with the quality of the water.
Yeah, and we also have a lot of green space just kind of knit throughout. So I think if we were, you know, in a more detailed design phase of this project and engineering it, we'd be sheet draining this to landscape areas and then collecting it in landscape areas, not putting it straight in a pipe. And so there's other things that we just sort of do as standard practice to mitigate some of that impact with runoff. But we are acknowledging two pretty substantial areas to help handle that.
Did we decide on getting rid of the small craft launch in the beach
Nope.
area?
Well, the beach is a good question. So
Not like sand beach, but
because
pebble
we
beach.
just kind of, I think it just kind of fell off our radar as we were working through all this other stuff. So I think the beach still makes a lot of sense. That the idea of the perched beach that we talked about, which is not a bathing beach,
Right.
but the idea of a place to just get to the water. So I think we need to, Ray, I think we need to talk about that a little bit more because it just sort of fell off.
Yep, we can add that into this. It's included in the Rainbow Master Plan as well because it's really Rainbow Park. But we should definitely add it to this to be
Yeah.
consistent with what we have at Rainbow as well.
And this is the zone where, so this piece, and we'll see in the phasing, but thinking is that in phase one, you get a path that gets you out to a little overlook point, and then in a future phase, you build this dock with kayak launch and access to the water and a good spot to fish out at the end of it. So this is really that water access. And people will use it in different ways. I mean, somebody might come up kind of doing the water trail kind of idea, right, and paddle up from downtown or campus or wherever, and dock their boat and just use the pier to get to the park. Some people might come to the cul-de-sac, unload their kayak, and take it down the beach to the water. So I think there's different ways we can kind of approach that. The south end of the site here, this is pretty consistent with what we reviewed last time in terms of leveraging the proximity to the restrooms, the proximity to the ball diamond to get a little off-street parking, have a flexible picnic lawn, and then this idea of the nature playground. So that's the logs and rocks and things like that for climbing. So, we really see that as a nice relationship to the ball field. Families are there for a game and kids can be playing while the game is happening and that kind of thing. So, pretty straightforward. This is not easy to read, but this is what's in your packet. So, we're calling these budget targets, right? Because you can't do a cost estimate really on a master plan unless you want to build in a 100% contingency. Because there's just too many things that are not figured out in the level of detail needed to inform a unit cost takeoff, right? One of those things being what I mentioned earlier in terms of grading associated with tee boxes and greens and things like that. So, but what we did do is think about this in terms of phased improvements, and where we knew there was the potential for there to be a lot of cost relative to the total project cost. We tried to get into more detail in terms of kind of a coarse grain cut fill analysis, looking at how much does it cost per cubic yard to dredge versus excavate onshore, that sort of thing. So that is built into the numbers, and I'm sorry we can't read this. I can try and zoom in on it, but this is basically breaking down those items that were in this spreadsheet with a unit cost for each item. So phase one is basically the building, the parking, the lawns, revamping the two ponds adjacent to the building and lawns. Again, because the building terrace is going to engage those. That's really part of how this building fits into the site. So prioritizing those. And then what you see here, that kind of thread that weaves through, that's the existing trail, right? So that's what we're stitching into. The big costs here in phase one are really the building. And we don't have a building designed, but a good budgeting number for this type of building is about $500 a square foot. So we assumed a 2,500 square foot building that gets us to about $1.25 million. And then the remainder of the big costs between the terraces and things like walls and stairs to get you up to the building, the public plaza, and the splash play, I think in total that probably adds about $1 million more. Does that help? Okay. So it gives you a feel for the breakdown of this phase one piece. Again, scraping and seeding the lawns, pretty low ticket item. The bulk of the work is in things like terraces, and here you see, in phase one, right, this terrace is engaging the pond. So this idea of holding that thing up behind a retaining wall. So trying to be conservative with what we're presenting to you in terms of numbers, knowing that, again, at a master plan level, there's still a lot to figure out. But that puts us pretty close to our phase one target, just with hard costs. We put a really big contingency on this because, again, we want to be conservative. But the reality of this is, when the city comes to budget this, they will set a budget based on anticipated costs and what the city can do as they phase this in. So this is meant to be kind of a target, and then it gets dialed in as we go. The other thing that I wanted to mention about the phasing is that Ray and I have been kind of talking about phasing as brackets on improvements. We don't necessarily think that you would build all of phase 3 or all of phase 4 at once, but it's a way of prioritizing. It's a way of prioritizing this thing without getting too into the weeds in terms of 15 phases of work, right?
I just need the people at home to hear you too, Nathan.
They're all having sticker shock, just like we are, Ray.
So phase 2 is basically lawn and pathways, parking, and the trailhead at the West Park. Hard costs are budgeted at $1 million for that. Phase 3 is revamping and cleaning up and restoring the edges of the pond system, except for the 2 ponds that were included in the phase 1 costs, and then restoring the shoreline. Now, this is a pretty big number. I think it's 4.8, but the bulk of that number, frankly, is in excavation of the shoreline and re-revetting and protecting that shoreline. Right now, some of the costs we're seeing on projects around the state for like a revetted shoreline are on the order of $1,500 to $2,000 a lineal foot. You have 4,500 lineal feet of shoreline. We assumed for this pricing exercise that, you know, given that this is a very shallow lake, we know you have some wake issues through this zone as boats exit the river. You know we have some pretty important infrastructure at the west end of the park, so we made the assumption that we're re-revetting about 25% of the shoreline. And, you know, of course, that also built into that, there's costs for excavating all of that shoreline, pulling all the concrete out of there, disposing of the concrete, excavation to accommodate the new revetment. And because we're working without coastal analysis right now, again, we're being conservative. So this is a true revetment. It's where they dig in a toe. There's like a drain mat layer that keeps the dirt from migrating up into the big rocks that you see on the surface. So it's a very engineered solution, which is what's driving that big price. What would happen once you get to this phase is there would be a robust coastal analysis of which would tell you wave climate. It would tell you how the water moves up and down when a storm rolls through and the wind pushes the water towards the park and that sort of thing. And that would really inform what we need to do to protect the shoreline and where we need to protect it. So right now this is kind of a, it's a good estimate, but you have to dig in more detail. The other thing that's worth noting, even though this is the phase with the biggest number, it is also probably the phase where you have the best opportunities to engage potential funding partners for grants, because waterfront work and restoration work is really where we can find partners with the state and DNR and things like that. So phase 4 basically builds out the rest of the West Park, so that's where your structures come in, the rest of your pathways, connect things together, the restroom building. So we're looking at 1.5, I think, for that. Thank you. And then phase 5 basically fills out the rest of the east half of the park. So the lawns that weren't included in phase 1, the nature playground, and kind of the restoration work. So this is basically that regrading, reseeding that really would effectively erase the golf course look and give you the nature park that people identified. So that is where we are at currently with the preferred concept plan and trying to get our hands around phased implementation of the plan. And Ray, I don't know if do you have anything else you want to throw in there before we open it up?
No, I think you covered a lot of things. I know there's a lot of uneasiness about the price tag, and I understand that, but as we've been saying all along, this is probably a 20-year plan. We're not going to bite this off in 1 or 2 chunks. It's going to be 10 or 15 chunks. So we need to understand that. We have a lot of plans out there for a lot of parks. So ask questions of Nathan while he's here. We could talk about the different options for phasing, but when we looked at it, we felt phase 1 had to have some kind of a splash effect for the community, so that's why we needed that year-round shelter. Just putting in parking spaces and a couple trails I don't think would be best use of our phase 1. So that's kind of what we were suggesting. The splash pad, some of those other things, Initially, we didn't have those in phase one, but as we talked about it and thinking about some potential partners and funding options of others that might want to get involved, I think a splash pad on the west side of the city more. We've had some discussions about a splash pad in different areas with different groups. So something like that I think might be a possible fundraiser or a partnership with somebody. So it may not all be city cost, as Nathan said.
Well, yeah, correct. And I mean, just to put it in perspective, I mean, I know this doesn't help when in the grand total of the budget target, but you know, we have a project where the Army Corps is kicking in $1 million, and the city's contribution is $333,333.33 because they have to pay 1/3 or 30%. So. So, you know, there are those partnerships out there. We, especially on the waterfront end of things, there's a lot of opportunity, and I think there's interventions that could be made to take the trail and engage the waterfront, you know, on a place-by-place basis while you worked out the bigger picture. Can we revamp 2,000 feet here and then 2,000 feet here by engaging those partners?
I think the other thing that we took a look at is we do need parking. We need parking on the east side to start with, just to get people onto the site. Once the lakefront trail is completed, we're already starting design for the next phase, which will bring us in through Rainbow Park and to the intersection of Sawyer, Oshkosh Ave. So we need to have that parking on the east side to get people into this park, but also to help with some of the parking needs that we know we're going to have at Rainbow Memorial because of the ball field dedication that we had. So it's really a good fit for that area to start looking at parking now, along with that big splash for our phase one.
Does anyone have any questions?
I've got a question just about, you know, the paths.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like there's a lot of unnecessary paths. Like it looks kind of like the new interchange up in Appleton, where, you know, you've got great big huge looping roads, and you don't really need that for bikes or walking.
Mike and Ped might have something to say about that,
Yeah.
Becky.
Well, look at that.
Well, did
Like
you say
right
they're
here.
not all the same? The perimeter is one type of trail, and the interior is more of a not as paved of a trail. Is that?
Well, I think that level of detail we can dig into more, because that's kind of easy to tweak that hierarchy. The way we were thinking about it is that the kind of outer loop
Bases.
would be a loop for maintenance access and a loop for people to walk.
So that's 12 or 14 feet, I'm assuming?
No, I would say 8 to 10 feet.
8 to 10?
Yeah.
Right.
10 to 12.
Where we don't need parks driving on pathways, I'm thinking these are 6-foot walks to 8-foot walks. And, you know, the idea is because we are proposing, so the lawns, for instance, because we're proposing to limit parks maintenance to just mowing the lawns, and then, you know, on a biannual basis, we'd have to, you know, mow the prairie areas and things like that. But that walkway,
Do we burn them or cut them? I'm sorry. I mean,
you could do either. Burning would
Okay.
be cool. And fast. I did a prairie burn this year. It was fast.
Yep.
But it helps with maintenance, right? Because it gives you access to the lawn from all sides. It creates a pretty clear demarcation for where you mow and where you don't. I think if you were to say, we need to implement this and we need to save $100,000, you could very easily think about changing out some of these paths to a stabilized aggregate. You could look at skinnying up even more of them. You could say everything is asphalt, we're not doing concrete anywhere, that would save some money. So, you know, there's flexibility in terms of how that implementation works. And, you know, what we were trying to do is just say, if you were to build the whole vision over whatever time frame the city's comfortable with.
Becky, I share your comment because I had them scale back quite a bit from originally, but I would agree that these don't have to all get built, as Nathan was showing in that whatever future phase. What we see is, though, if we don't build them, we wait till whatever we call cow paths. Well, people are going to go their natural route to get to somewhere. Once we start seeing that, it's like, all right, we need a path there because that's their typical flow. So it may deviate a little bit from this plan. It may take us a little bit to find where that traffic flow is, but it may be reduced from what you're seeing here. I think this is agreeable at this point, but it may not be what is ultimately developed out there.
Yeah, and I think it's really about, going back to the community's desire for a park that's about engaging with nature. That's really driving what, we don't want to give them one path from A to B, right? We want them to be
I
able
know,
to
but look at
sort of-
those, like right from the parking lot. There's like 1,
Right.
2, 3, 4, 5 little tiny areas of green space.
Yeah.
Why couldn't you somehow
Yeah,
combine those?
there- I could see areas where we may be able to find efficiency, sure.
And I don't want to chime in here, but I will, Bob. But I want everybody to understand, this is a big picture, 10,000-foot plan, and like what Ray said, we'll dummy this down at some point, you know what I mean? But I don't want anybody to get stuck on this big master plan like this is carved in stone. I think we all just gotta say, okay, we like the concept, and then as time goes on, and we actually start funding this and actually start building it, I think that's when the rubber meets the road. Is that accurate?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's totally accurate.
But your point is well made. I know there was one question too that came up as far as, Becky, you had the question. What was your other question? Art, public art.
Yeah.
I think we had up on the icon hill, didn't we have public art? We may want to at least add that so that
Yeah, visually add it, yeah.
Yeah.
not only visually, but add the verbiage, because I think that was missed by us somewhere up on that iconic hill as well.
I'm not suggesting that we put art in every spot that we can, but I think it'd be good to have a couple more isolated spots along the trails for public art. I'd like there to be more than a couple, like more than 1 or 2 spots with that. And so, like, I picture this area coming off here where there's a triangle, having that be like a spot for public art, because it's the triangle accentuates it.
Yeah,
So, and then, finding some other spots along that east side as well. I think, not necessarily close to the cultural area, because that
Right.
has its own definition, defined area, presence. But somewhere where there's, I think a lot of spots at like trailheads and stuff like that are good spots for public art.
yeah, and maybe one way to kind of put that within the context of the park would be to talk about those as true community art spaces. So where local artists are making something, whereas the hilltop installation could be more about community identity, less an art destination, but more the icon that is going to get people up there for the
How it identifies us.
hashtag Oshkosh, right?
And I think in the final document that is completely put together, we'll reference that. I don't think we necessarily need to show those areas, because we're going to have historic signage. I know the Landmarks Commission is already starting to have discussions about historic signage along the trail. This type of 10,000-foot view, we're not going to say here's where the signage is going, but we know that's going to be incorporated into the site somewhere. And I think we'll need to include that in the verbiage throughout the document then.
Okay.
Lighting is always big around parks. I know this is the 10,000-foot view, but what are your thoughts on lighting in the park?
Oh, there'll be lighting.
Oh, yeah, there'll be lights.
Yeah, it'll be our standard park lights, and we work with our city electrician on spacing, just like we do on the Riverwalk. We come up with a plan based on overflow lighting, and here we're going to have lighting because there's not a lot of access roads for the police department to get out there, so they'll want to be able to see things from as many roads and parking lots as they can.
Okay.
Go
But,
ahead.
no, I was just, if you've got something else, I was just gonna say in general, is it something that, what we had been discussing, I guess, all along, so that's what we were looking for.
Yeah, I think, oh, go ahead.
All right, thank you. I guess my only other comment is just, there's a lot of access to this property in regards to bikes and vehicles and stuff like that. But one of the things that we talked about at one of our last meetings, I think 2 meetings ago, was access like through bus transit and stuff like that. And still not, a transit bus will have to go off its normal path right now in order to get to, in order to get to this park. If there was a way that, we could have some type of, basic hub where someone could be dropped off, either on the east side or the west side, it allows people who don't have access to a vehicle, who may not be able to get there, in more accessible, in unaccessible ways. Just kind of keeping that greater community access at the, in that forefront of that. This design I have struggles with that because I can't conceptualize how that works right now. So can you just give me an idea of what you're thinking on that?
I'm thinking that's gonna be something I'm passing along to Jim Collins and the transit department as they look at their bus routes out in this area. That's something that they know better, their business, than we do. We can say, yeah, we'd like to have, a bus location or somewhere near, off the Rath Lane parking lot or Rainbow somewhere, but I don't think it's for us to say this is where it needs to go because we don't know their operation. I don't know their operation, but I made note of it to make sure that I pass it along to Jim Collins tomorrow that this is something they need to look at and plan for.
I think it's interesting. I think it's good to note that most bus lines have access to public parks in Oshkosh. So, I think it's good to keep that in mind for this park as well.
And I think hopefully they're planning for that because of all the redevelopment that's already starting to take place around Casey's and, the hotel discussion. There's going to have to be some, it might not be right at the park, but at least it's going to have that access off of Oshkosh Ave, so it's a quick bike ride or walk a block down to the park. But I'll make sure and pass that along, and we'll make sure it's noted in the minutes as well, because I think it's a big point.
Any other questions from the board?
I had one other thing.
Of course you do.
Phil, settle down. One of the things that I really liked about the 3 previous designs is that we had some overlooks on bridges and stuff. Now, I understand the bigger picture is that bridges are long-term maintenance challenges, but is there any potential for a bridge somewhere over there that overlooks a body of water in there or gives a higher, there's one? Where is one?
Up on the northwest corner, is that Boardwalk Bridge up there?
Yeah, that's,
I guess I didn't see that as a bridge.
well, it's part of the new trail, correct?
Okay.
But it's a good acknowledgement. There are several nodes with seating on the trail that will remain. But I don't disagree with you. That was something that I was thinking we need to take another look at as well. Because previously we had looked at, that little knuckle kind of at the west end of the stepped revetment, right? As a little sort of pull off from the trail. And I think, at this 10,000 foot level, that stuff gets lost, but I think what we need to do is be explicit about acknowledging that stuff, at least in a diagram, so that the intent is clear that it's not just all through paths. I mean, there's moments throughout, and I think we need to.
So I guess looking at the northwest corner, that could be, instead of a boardwalk, it could be an extensive potential bridge there, correct? Is that?
Well, so the bridge at the northwest pond, so that was a boardwalk that we were imagining, one of those few places where we kind of kept that idea in. So maybe it's just a matter of a couple of knuckles on pathways engaging the water and then getting those few lookout points at the edge of the lake back in the plan.
Anything else from the board? All right, I'd like to open it up to anyone in the audience. And when you come up, please.
Daunting,
I know.
representing everybody in town.
Yep. All right.
I'm turning in a couple copies. Okay, thank you. I'm Kathleen Propp, 1936 Hazel Street. And again, these are my personal comments, not those of any group I happen to be part of. In general, I support this preferred concept plan as proposed, with some significant questions about shoreline restoration and ponds, plus one deletion. And I think Ray said there will be a narrative document to explain this plan. There should be, in addition to these phases, bullet points, because individual words in that narrative document will be very important. And I do like all the paths. Walking and biking is the key feature of this park. So some of the paths can be smaller, but I like them. And I ask the question in this, will all existing ponds remain? And I think I got the answer, yes, they would. But on the diagram, I don't see a one-to-one relationship between the existing ponds and the new ponds, which doesn't matter. It's just a matter of will they or won't they. And it sounds like mostly they will. Existing mature trees, will these remain, such as there are any left? And that's a rhetorical question right now for you to consider and others to consider. And then I asked the question, what is the timeline to construct phase 1 and phase 2? And again, right now, it's a rhetorical question. It depends on the budget. And I don't know what's budgeted, and maybe you don't even know either, because you're going to be passing or not this plan and passing it along to the council. And then I ask, again, somewhat rhetorically, why is phase 3 postponed? Because it seemed to me that all this rubble removal and stabilization work could cause damage to our new trail. I don't know about that, but obviously cost is a factor in the postponement. Why isn't it the first one? And Ray did explain that he wanted an impact of the first phase, which would be that eastern section. Going on to phases individually, phase 1, I can support all bullet points, and I had a note here of how large the terraces and public plaza near the Four Seasons building might be, but I had some explanation of that. Phase 2, I can support all bullet points, except that I thought the cultural recognition area was in the east plan, and it's listed on the west plan, I think.
It's actually on the east, Kathy. It is on the east.
Yeah, I think it said west on the phase 2 bullet points, but that's okay. Phase 3, though, I do have concerns about phase 3 relative to the shoreline restoration and ponds. And so I asked the question in this, what does articulation and restoration of ponds mean? And I got some answer to that, that there might be, the ponds that are there might be reworked a little, a small extension, regrade the margins, something like that. But anyhow, I think people will want to know, what does that mean? And I also strongly support, as you know, native plantings around the edges of all ponds. And I think I heard that that's what is in the plan, plantings around the edges. And I heard again, perhaps 50% of the edges of ponds. And maybe that referred to the wetland section. I don't know. But I am concerned about the revetment thing. And I know that's down the line, and it was explained. But that word is foreign to me, so I looked it up. And I found the definition of stone or concrete sloping structure along lakeshore banks that stabilize and protect from erosion and water action. And yes, of course, stabilization is needed. We've got to do something. But I strongly prefer, if it's possible, green, flexible engineering solutions rather than, I can just visualize a concrete slab slapped up against the bank, and that will just hurt. I think we can't do something like that. I also want native plantings lining the entire lakeshore between the trail and the lakeshore, with the exception of the step section that I find a little problematic. And please, no lawns mowed right to the edge of the water. Even those two lawns that are close to the water, that's fine, but not right to the edge. That's damaging the ecosystem. And I got the question answered about personal watercraft. That means kayaks and canoes. And I asked the difficult question about what is the thinking for allowing fishing along the shoreline, and I don't want to know the answer right now. Phase 4, I can support the West Park small restroom building and small open-air shelters. I wondered what the earthworks and prairie sections were, and I think I got an answer. The earthworks, would they be covered with prairie? Except for any path on the earthworks? Correct. Oh, okay, they'd be covered on, and how high, I asked. You said high enough to get a view of the lake. Phase 5, which pathways are left? And I think I saw an answer in this larger rendering. I'm still opposed to a Mary Jewel parking lot if this means significant traffic on those little small incoming residential streets. I don't know that we need that extra Mary Jewel parking lot. And then cost. Obviously, the $10 million cost is huge. People will be choking on it. But this is our gorgeous. This should be a real destination park, and it will be. And basically, if this concept plan can be more or less implemented, it'll be great. But the public does need to have a preliminary financing plan before this concept plan is adopted, I think, or along with. Questions that can't be answered tonight. What is the Oshkosh Corporation share? What significant Oshkosh Foundation fund campaign might be involved? What part might realistically be funded by grants? We heard some of that. Then a more important question, what will the unfinished sections of the park look like until their turn comes? With a phased approach, how can we ensure that the plan for this significant Lakeshore Community Park will be completed? I don't want to see part of it completed, the east half or something. Well, we haven't got enough money for the west half. No, that's just not a plan if we're going to do this. And then I ask, should the top priority portions of plan in each section be constructed first? And I think I heard Ray say that the board might pick out top priority from here, here, and here, so that we've got something over on the west side, for example, instead of waiting. I can't, I don't want to wait years and years and years, 100,000 here, 100,000 there, for this park. We just can't. So we have to figure out a community-wide way to address this. Big donors, like I say, Oshkosh Foundation, big fund campaign, something, so that we're not waiting maybe more than 3 years, maybe 4. That's my idea anyway. So thank you. And those are rhetorical questions that I hope the board will consider and others as we go down the line. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from the board? Or, okay, more out in the, wanna come up? Name and address.
Tina Jeffrey, 1141 Sawtell Court. So this is my neighborhood, and I already see people walking down there, and we're all curious. We're walking our dogs, so I think it's hard for me to see and conceptualize how the path system is working and how intricate it is, but I do think that is, one thing that's obviously important, because I'm already seeing people want to get down there and walk. It's the easiest way to access. I like the pathways that interact with all of the ponds and the nature kinds of native plantings that are going to be around there. That's important. So, if it has to be a little bit intricate, I'm good with that. I think that's going to be probably the biggest use of that park. Also, anytime if we can get a bridge built, I would love that. And my biggest question was, how do I get my hands on one of these concept design plans ahead of time so I can see it?
If you go on, I'm sorry, if you go on the city website under Parks Board, the
Yeah.
agenda and the
Was
attachments
this
should all
one
be
on
there.
there?
Not this full one, a broken down one that was provided to the board.
Oh, okay. Okay, I guess I missed that.
Yep. Any agendas and minutes will be there for this meeting and upcoming meetings too.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
That covers that conversation. Ray, any follow-up comments?
I guess I don't. Looking for some direction from the board at this point. If you need some further information for us to work on to come back,
Is tonight appropriate to vote to send this on if there isn't any other asks?
that was what our goal and intent was, but I guess it's up to the board, so.
We can nitpick this thing for another 500 years. Let's ship it off to council and see what happens is my,
I agree.
yeah,
Yeah, from a 10,000-foot view, it's,
yeah.
you know, incorporates everything everyone asked for.
Yeah.
It's the most part, I mean.
So if that's the board's, yes, Bob?
It's been my question all the way through, so, historical, the application that was put forward for historical recognition, how are we on that related to the park?
The note here says get archaeological information from Alan Davis and Kelly because they've been working on that. So that's what I'll be getting, and I can get copies out to the board as well. Because I just noticed it on Friday in the city manager's newsletter as well. So it's been their department working on it, so we'll get a copy.
So, moving forward with this plan, even though we may give its go-ahead today to go to the plan commission and the council, just as Bill was saying, there's still gonna be several opportunities down the line that may tweak it, change it. It may not turn out to be anything like what we do here. It's just that this is a framework.
I wouldn't say anything like, I'm hoping that this is gonna be us, this is what's gonna
Right.
drive us for the
Right.
plan, yes.
I guess
But there are tweaks to be made,
Put
of course.
it a different way. 5 years down the line, there might be some other new type of thing that you might think is a good thing to put in there. And you have the ability to come back to us and say, hey, is this something that we want to think about that it adds this type of enhancement which may further certain other objectives within the community. We have that ability to do that.
Correct.
This is not a set in stone thing, this is a framework.
Yeah, and I can, just some examples. We have a number of projects through a lot of the neighborhoods that may not be in the Menominee Park Master Plan. We're putting exercise equipment along the trail. That wasn't part of the document, but as they come forward, if there's funding available, and that'll be a big part of it too, is if somebody does step forward and wants to fund something, or we have a grant that becomes available, that might move up in the priority list as well. As you know, serving on council, it depends on where that funding comes from. So this is not set in stone. This is a concept plan, but it's a plan that we're going to move forward as we start coming back here with, this is what we're proposing to do in the park, just like our corp and other plans that we have.
So, and I think it's important to note that at this point right now, I think this conceptual plan is what the Parks Board is hearing about. It's what people are talking about to us and council members and stuff, and that this is what we see now as the best plan moving forward. So, and I think that's important to kind of take note of that because time sometimes changes things, and I think it's really important to just acknowledge that this is a plan that's gone through several different levels of community engagement, and lots of people providing us with their opinions of what not to do, what to do, that type of stuff. So and acknowledging that in the future, it's still gonna continue to be that way, because it's still gonna come back to the Parks Board. They still come back to the Planning Commission in different forms. They'll always come back to the council to approve those types of changes as well, so.
And I think you're right. I think a lot of credit goes to Smith Group. I think they did a good job when they first were hired to come to the state of the city. I mean, they've been coming here since March and getting that input and, you know, the public input meetings, the surveys, and I think they did a good job on listening to this board and the citizens, and you're seeing a lot of that, I think. You're seeing a lot of those ideas, as Nathan grouped them out, those same ideas were coming from the board, the citizens, and Kathy and the Plan Commission, sustainability. I think a lot of those things were put into this concept plan, I guess.
And my final concern, and then I'll be quiet, Miller, is, you know, partially the only concern that I feel like I've heard from the community that I think is warranted bringing to the board is how quick this process and this plan has been created, and also in comparison as to how quickly that plot of land has changed within the last year and a half. The only other critical concern is just that, why does it have to be so quick? Why do we have to have a plan in place so quickly? Is just a general note that I've heard from the community. I'm gonna go with this today because I think it's important to have a plan in place, knowing that a plan can be tweaked and remade and add things as we need them and stuff, and I think it's important to have a guide. But I think it's important to note that there are members of our community that feel that even the creation of this within the time frame of which we've communicated it is still quick for them. They're not all here tonight. Not everyone comes to public meetings and stuff like that. But I think it's important to note that still with how this land became available to create a new park option, this is a very quick turnaround to create a plan. So just noting that on behalf of another voice in the community. So.
Well, and I actually like to see this because finally government's not stuck in the mud. So I like to see us turn something around this quick. And Bob, I understand, I respect that, but I mean, this again, framework. So I mean, this is going to come back through us. Ray, jump in here anytime, but this is going to come back to us every time we jump through a phase. Is that accurate? I mean, it's going to end up on our doorstep for a lot of years here.
You're going to see it every year when I come forward with CIP, whether or not we have funding or projects that are ahead of things that we're going to do out here. You got to remember, this is, as Kathy might have said, a $10 million project.
Right.
We've got a $20 million zoo project. We've got a multi-million-dollar South Park project. We have a Rainbow Memorial Park plan. So all those things, as this group has seen, we bring forward at CIP, and you guys give the blessing, and the council ultimately decides what's going to be funded and what's not. So it's during that process. It's during the design process. If we do a new building, that's all coming here. So.
And I think it's important for those people that Bob's talking about to understand, we're not edging them out of the conversation. We just need something to move forward with, and we can tweak this as we go, just like we do every other project that hits here. So
yep.
please pass that along to them.
And having two council members on.
No, and the community still has two, meetings. They have the Plan Commission and Common Council. I was hoping we'd have more here tonight, but I think we did a good job of vetting public input and the number of meetings that we've had. So
I'll make a motion to move the preferred concept plan along. Mr. Peschel seconded that down there, Jimbo. Oh, she did. Oh, sorry.
Bless you.
All right, Bartelt?
Aye.
Davis?
Aye.
Dirth?
Aye.
Royal?
Aye.
Metz?
Aye.
Miller?
Aye.
Millet?
Aye.
Peschel?
Aye.
Amy, if I could real quick, for the public that is wondering about the next meetings, we talked a little bit about it with planning staff, and November 5th or the 19th is Plan Commission. The 5th is our state conference for the WPRA, so I may be delaying this, and I need to check with Smith Group until the 19th, but at this point it may go to Plan Commission on the 19th, and then could look at still having it for council on the last meeting of November or the first meeting in December. So we're still on target, and I just need to make sure the public's aware of that, to keep an eye out on the Plan Commission. Thank you.
All right, let's move on to staff reports. Ray, kick us off.
Excuse me, I've got another
Thanks,
meeting,
everyone.
so you guys have a great night. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to say thank you. I appreciate everybody's.
Oh, I'm sorry,
input.
Nathan.
yeah,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Hey, no problem.
We'll be in touch tomorrow.
Yeah, sounds good.
Thanks.
Thanks.
I'm going to keep it brief. Talking about Lake Shore, and you may have heard this already, some council members I know are aware. As part of the trail that's going in, there are some contaminated soils that were discovered on the property. So we had to hire a environmental firm, and we've contracted with ACOM to assist us with us. They need to help us come up with some type of a work plan, as well as work with the DNR on what our options are for taking care of that issue that was uncovered. So I will continue to keep you updated on that, but I just wanted to make sure you're aware of that. A donation we recently received that is going to be installed. It's a bike repair station. Actually, it's almost exactly what was shown on the slides that Nathan had earlier. So it's a bike repair station that we received from the Chris Kegel Foundation. Chris was the founder of Wheel and Sprocket stores and passed away within the last 2 years, I think. And so they contacted the city and asked if we had an interest. I think they contacted Alexa first. The Bike and Pedestrian Committee had some discussion on, and we're looking to have that installed down at the Boatworks site, probably this week yet, depending on how things go. So that'll be one of our first bike stations or bike repair stations that we have here. As I said earlier, tomorrow night on the council agenda, there's some outdoor fitness equipment that we're looking to have a bid awarded. And we have been working with Menominee South Neighborhood Association. That's a project that they would brought forward and was funded by the council through some neighborhood funding. What their proposal is to have some of the wheelchair accessible pieces of equipment located on the new trail along Hazel, most likely close to Bella Vista, so that there's a number of residents there that can come over and use this, the equipment. And there's a couple pieces that we're looking at possibly installing over by the new equipment at Little Oshkosh, so that adults can use the outdoor exercise equipment when their kids are on the new equipment. So working with them on that project as well. The other thing that's been a lot for all of us staff is our staff evaluations, performance evaluations, and our budget is we're currently in process. Evaluations are behind us now, but we have our meeting with the Common Council next week. The council has workshops Monday, Tuesday, the full day for budget workshops. Our budget meeting is on Tuesday afternoon with the council, so we're preparing that information. So that's it.
Thank you, Ray. Chad?
Just a couple things to highlight for everybody for some projects that you've been seeing out in the parks or on social media. But Menominee Park, the Little Oshkosh Playground, is actually coming along fairly nicely. We have one coating of the surface, the top coat to get on there, and then doing some restoration work around the perimeter. Hoping that if weather cooperates, that by the end of next week we'll be hopefully have the site open for people to use around there. But we will be keeping a barrier fence around the concrete area, but leave access open to the playground when it does open, just to keep the foot traffic from the substrates and things from there, so we can keep on restoration in there and not have tracking up onto the facility. But hopefully things will come well for that. If you're down in the park, Menominee Park as well, you've probably seen the framework for the Eagle exhibit take place down there, actually coming along very nice. We have a little bit of utility work to do with our water extension into the exhibit, but the meshing and fabric will be taking place here within the next month. Plus we'll be doing some landscaping here, hopefully before the ground freezes as well, going forward. Following the construction of that, I'll start researching more of bald eagles that can come to this exhibit here for next year, and hopefully we have everything in place and ready to go for our opening in the spring of the year of 2020. So it is an impressive sight, especially if you're from the road, looking up in the vista that the birds will have, plus the views that people have at the exhibit. I think it'll do very well at Menominee Park Zoo. So Tech Miller Park, as you know, has been a continual work in progress over the past year and a half. In cooperation for the athletic field, batting cage areas up there. I can honestly say we've got some good headway there over the past month with some drain tiling in the park. Also restoration to the outfield area and seated, with goals that things come up very well next year for use for the youth programs. We're going to continue to work on the batting cage here as well as we can get concrete into the ground and work with that, and hopefully have the framework together for that so the cage can go up next spring for use as well. West Haven Park restroom. If you've been out there, you've probably seen some changes to the facade of the building out there, but the interior work is coming along very well. That facility will be up and running here probably, or I should say up and completed here by the end of the month, which will be great. Hopefully do a walkthrough with the contractors here in the near future, but that will be established and opening in the spring of 2020. We will not be opening any further this year. All of our current restrooms have been winterized, with the exception of the central restrooms at Menominee Park that is heated and used for year-round use. That'll be the only functional restroom this time. So just want to give an update on that. And if you have noticed throughout the river this past weekend, navigation ended on the 15th of October. All the river buoys and lake buoys have been removed at this time. So our restrooms and stuff at the boat launches and things of that nature. So just so the public are aware that things that are happening out there and shut down for the season. So that's all I got for you guys right now, unless there's any other questions.
That's a lot, I think. Jenny?
So like Chad mentioned, we're just getting all of our facilities now are closed for the season. So we just this past weekend had our last big event for the Parks Department. We had our Zulaween Boo in the zoo, which is our biggest fundraiser of the year that we have. And I just don't have all the reports done, but as far as numbers, this was year 17 of the event. We had 4,231 people who came through in 2 days, so that was the second most ever in the 17 years. So it was crazy both days. We couldn't have asked for better weather, so it was just perfect, and lots of people out to the zoo, which is great. So I'll be working on some of the other numbers as far as sponsorships that we got in and fees at the gate and things like that for next month. But so it was a very, very busy weekend. So now we'll work on shutting down all the facilities, getting reports done from all of those, and working forward to already planning for next year and next season, the different events we're going to have out there. So in the next month or two, we'll get together all the numbers from the Leach this summer, from movie nights and concerts and facilities. So so stay tuned for that.
Bill?
Yeah, thank you. We're just completing a couple of grants that we had this year. From one of them was from 1,000 Friends of Wisconsin, which was an $18,000 grant to do tree planting for stormwater mitigation. So we've got that completed, and then we also completed a planting along the River Walk in the Morgan District. So that was a grant that came through Bay Lakes, which is a Great Lakes Restoration Initiative grant. So we got those essentially completed and paperwork sent in, so should be getting reimbursed on those two items. One thing that's we were hoping to get done on Friday, but the weather has been a little bit difficult for us, is we're going to install a holiday tree at Opera House Square. It'd be a living and permanent tree on that site. Unfortunately, with the wet conditions, it was a little difficult for the contractor with the tree spade to get in. So we're hoping to get that done here prior to obviously the holiday preparation. So hope for some dry weather so we can get that thing in there. So then our staff will come in and light it up as they usually do with the tree that we've done there every year. So other than that, the staff is busy with a lot of tree removal yet, stump removals that are ongoing right now throughout the city. We've had a lot of ash that we lost this year, as many of you know, so we're a little behind the curve on some of those removals yet, so I appreciate the public's patience with us and trying to get that work done. So we're very busy. The weather has not been exactly conducive for some of that work, but we're still moving forward with it at a pretty good rate. Also, we were cleaning out a lot of our shrub beds and gardens, so we get everything kind of winterized too throughout the parks and other public spaces that we maintain. So that's all.
Great, thank you. Any other business? All right. Make a motion to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.